I think that liberals have a lot of good intentions, and some of them are more effective than other ones. I actually had this thought the other day while I was on a walk, where I think that ideal liberalism is kind of like Bob the Builder politics.
Scoop and Rolly, you're coming with me.
Can we fix it? Yes, we can!
I think so, yeah.
That's their whole motif. And I feel like conservatives aren't always in this position, but right now there's this kind of air of, can we fix it? No, we can't. It's completely broken. We need to destroy it. And I don't really like that. And I don't think that Poilievre necessarily falls completely into this, but he definitely does in regards to things like the CBC and the housing plan that the Liberals recently did, which I think was a good plan. I think it sounded like a conservative plan, honestly, essentially removing the ability. Actually, no, maybe not, because it depends on where you're sitting on that fence, I guess. But like the whole idea is that I guess a lot of conservatives they would rather have local governments controlling things, and liberals do kind of opt into more broad reaching countrywide policies. Right. And so their housing policy, where they were trying to lift some of those restrictions that were being put on by local municipality governments, like was a way to kind of for them to get over like the NIMBY stuff, like where a lot of people were opposing having bigger multifamily units built in their neighborhoods. And the Liberals basically made it so that they weren't able to deny anything less than like a 6 unit, 6 or less. Anything with that many or less, they weren't allowed to deny that, like 6 units in a single like plot for a home. I don't know what the actual technical term is for that, but like a plot of land that would usually be designated for a single family unit, they could build 6 units on it now, and it wouldn't be as long as they're meeting all the like standards you need for, like, it needs to have 6 kitchens and 6 bathrooms and all that stuff, right? But like removing some of those barriers that were in the way, because sometimes if you go to Vancouver, there's all these single family homes. It is not a very efficient use of the space there. Every time I drive through that little neighborhood, I can't believe, for one, these houses are all worth like $2 million each. And you have a single family living in this huge piece of land that could be housing multiple people if you built up, right? And we've got all these issues with traffic. The roads aren't wide enough, and people are having to travel really far for work, and the rents are so high. And this is a huge contributor to that problem, right? So I think that that was a good policy. And it bugs me when Poilievre I feel like anything with that liberal stamp on it is immediately thrown into the wastebasket, right? In the same way that Trump with the CHIPS Act.
I think that's changing. I think that tide's turning with Carney.
I hope so.
With Carney's administration also kind of doing it to him, it gives Poilievre a political reasoning to do it without seeming too liberal, right? And I think the problem is that endorsing Trudeau or even being nice to him in public was somehow politically damaging. You know what I mean? And I think we saw that between Scott Moe and Trudeau's interaction.
We in Saskatchewan, we continue to be Canadians.
Mr. Trudeau, do you plan on running in the next election? And if you don't, what are you going to do when you're not Prime Minister anymore?
First of all, I want to thank Scott for that answer. It's rare I get such support, but no, I do have to say that particularly those who've been around. Oh, sorry, I'm endangering your political fortunes by thanking you publicly.
Yeah, and even some of the backlash that Doug Ford gets from working with people like Christina Freeland and Justin Trudeau, which is absurd. They're the prime minister and the deputy prime minister. Of course, a premier should be working with them. It doesn't make any sense for them to not. You're purely playing partisan politics when you are against things like that.
Yeah, and I think
actually, I just want to expand on this a little bit, because I was reading something. It was actually an Elon Musk tweet, I think, where he was saying, or it was a clip of him in an interview saying that he was against sending money to the Ukraine, because of we need to be putting our own country first, right? And our own country's interests first. And I feel like there's like this allergy, like this like complete ignorance of the concept of a mutual, like an overlapping interest between two nations. Like it's impossible for this to exist. And you see that with the tariffs, and you see that with the Ukraine stuff, and you see that with, going to Europe and crapping all over them, saying they don't have free speech and stuff with the JD Vance speech, right? And this is stuff where it's just like, you know,
Well, some
you can
countries
still
don't
advance your
value-
interests just because you don't.
They don't value freedom of speech to the same degree, right? And they don't have like they have freedom of speech in the sense that
It's
like
different
like, you know,
types.
90% of what you say is going to be fine. But a good example is like if you played a recent game that's come out of China that a lot of people are playing. So it was I think one of the #1 games on Steam shortly for a little bit was Marvel Rivals. And you'll notice when you're playing this game that if you type into the chat, you can't type free Taiwan or Taiwan as a nation, free Tibet, Winnie the Pooh.
Of course.
Your general Chinese censorship whole list, right? And I think
it's
just
so funny that Winnie the Pooh's on there.
it is funny because people didn't know that.
That's hilarious.
President Xi Jinping in China has banned Winnie the Pooh because of a bunch of people memeing him next to Winnie the Pooh, saying he does kind of.
They do look very similar.
It is.
They look very similar.
But at the same time, you know, yeah, like you know, I hope we don't, you know,
not enough that you should ban
watch
them.
this get taken off YouTube
but
for this conversation. No, but like it's
well, you know,
just this is what I mean, right? It's just like I think because there's a lot of fear mongering, I think, with China's influence in Western society. And I think a lot of it comes from the US and Canada. I think in Canada, we're way more worried about China than we are Russia, right? And I think that's a huge part of why so many people couldn't understand or didn't really care for supporting Ukraine. And like and not to mention, if you hear it come off like, oh, they're giving $3 billion to Ukraine. Well, it's like, well, it's not technically $3 billion, it's like 600 million cash maybe, and then like a bunch of other stuff. You know what I mean? So it's not, they try and make it sound as big as possible in the media and for these politicians to make it sound like they're doing some kind of grand gesture for this country. But in reality it's not as good as it sounds, and it's not as costly to us as it might sound as well. And you could argue that supporting stuff like Ukraine is probably better for our government to send tax dollars than for people to be, panhandling you at every Walmart till. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, at least with your government sending tax dollars, that money is at least going to, they have to have a paper trail for that and where all that money is going, right? And I think that's where a lot of people it's just more of a, because public distrust is so bad right now. And I think COVID and the whole 2020 era really damaged whatever trust people had in Trudeau's administration. And I think he's kind of given a generation of trust issues. I think the way Trudeau governed, the way he was about just ignoring issues, saying he'll deal with it eventually, never dealing with it, kind of like your worst nightmare for the average person when it comes to having your leader say these things. Like, yeah, everything he's saying is great, but then he never actually ends up doing it. Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed that, there's plenty more where that came from. You can find the link to the full episode in the description below. Click now, watch, and get grounded with all of us. Thanks for watching.